After a few days of the things being nailed to posts outside the castle gates in the dog days, Elizabeth began to complain of the stench and the flies and the piteous sight of their grimacing rodent faces. He laughed at her beguiling soft-heartedness, but reminded himself this was part of God's plan to test him. He should not be deceived by her name echoing that of his Gloriana. She was her father's daughter, after all. He was a knight-errant, and she the woman sent to tempt him with her wiles. "But poor Peregrine," she pleaded. "The nurse tells me he was a-weeping to wake the dead with the night terrors all this last night. My lord, methinks it must be these monsters you've mounted hereabouts, these gargoyles of flesh and blood, as might be in the shambles." "Tush," he scoffed, recalling his own evil dreams. "I pray no son of mine will be a whey-faced milksop to cringe at shadows. Unless it be that he hath more of your woman's blood than he hath of my manly sap. I hope the latter be the case, for the beasts I have displayed outside are as nothing compared to what he'll doubtless see and smell in battle." They were, after all, just rats when all was said and done, and dead rats to boot. But he wished the unseen creatures he kept hearing outside the walls would make haste and take what he'd left for them. The corpses were now so far gone, one could no longer see them for the glittering carapaces of the flies that swarmed upon them. Perhaps that was the problem. The things turned up their noses at such rank carrion now, did they? So this was what happened when you appeased them? They demanded choicer fare. Then he saw his mistake. Remembering those wretches he saw crawling from the woods and glens when the English forces humbled the treacherous Desmonds some 15 years before. They lacked the strength to raise themselves from the dirt. He could hardly expect them to be able to reach rats atop posts. The rain has cleared enough by morning for her to consider a trudge to the castle. But first she has to take a look outside to check for any mortally wounded or dead animal that might account for the dragging noises she heard the previous night. Her search reveals nothing but some odd prints that remind her of the designs on the tea towels and other trinkets she saw in the gift shop in Doneraile, in that they look more like hands than feet. Mrs. Fitzgerald won't be happy with the damage to the grass, which the prints have churned to mud. Whatever made the prints has also flattened the grass with its weight, consistent with the sounds of the previous evening. But what she sees next distracts her from fully digesting the implications of the markings. A half-eaten rat lies in the middle of the garden path, blocking her way. She could step over it, but she is so affronted by the sight and smell of the vile object that she grabs herself a shovel from the porch, scrapes it up, and hurls it, gagging, into the yew hedge bordering the cottage garden. It's only afterwards that she remembers Mrs. Fitzgerald's warning against doing this. She shrugs. She's damned if she's going to retrieve it and put it back where it was. Probably some old Cork superstition, and she'd heard enough of those from her grandmother back in the day. She's not going to live by them now, and she's paying good money to stay here in some minimal degree of comfort. The castle is a bit of a disappointment. Maybe it doesn't help that it's raining again by the time she gets there, soaking through her hiking boots and inadequate raincoat, so she can barely see what's left of it. She turns back before she can take a closer look after she nearly falls down one of the many holes that honeycomb the land around it. Stumbling around in the mist With them around is probably a bad idea, she concludes, especially given the big red sign saying basically enter at your own risk. Glancing back, she glimpses some large, dark-coloured animal disappear down one of them, as if swallowed by some vast, wet mouth. Something about it makes her shudder. She doesn't know why. Maybe it's the way it moves and the unexpectedness of its appearance. Or it could be its resemblance, despite its crawling motion, to a man wearing some kind of voluminous hooded cloak, one that covers all its limbs, if it has any. No, not the most appealing castle in Ireland, she thinks as she hurries back towards the car. Hardly surprising, since the rebels burnt it to the ground back in 1596, leading to Spenser's precipitate return to the more civilised world of Elizabethan London, where he died 2 years later. "Where is my babe, Edmund? Prithee tell me." He laid his hand upon her shoulders, but her grief would not be assuaged. "Fie, Elizabeth, weep not for him. He took his fate like a man in the end." How much worse would her lamentations be if he told her the truth of what happened to the infant? For there were bite marks upon his dismembered remains. Aye, and the teeth were those of men. It was his belief that what took him was no mere rebel, not the mortal men that sacked Kilcolman, but some other fiend. This confirmed his suspicions regarding the reasons for the creature's refusal to dine on the rats he left, even when he took them down from the posts and left them on the ground where they might devour them with ease. They preferred finer meat, that of his issue, and perhaps his descendants too. When she gets back to the cottage, feeling the want of human contact rather keenly, Dora reanimates her phone. There are half a dozen messages from Professor Keenan. Beep. "Hi, Dora. Look, sorry about how we left things. I was out of order. Hope you got there okay and the traffic was... Just take care, okay? Bob." Well, nice he cares. Not just after one thing. But Bob. He always wanted to be on first name terms. She sees why now. Beep. "Dora, I get that you're not my #1 fan right now, but if you wouldn't mind letting me know you're okay, that'd be grand. Just grand." Sounds really worried. Or he could just be the controlling sort. That would raise flags even if he weren't married and old enough to be her father. Beep. "Listen, I did a bit of digging about the local legends. Well, you know how we were saying it was funny how you were called Boyle, Elizabeth Spenser's maiden name. Look, I don't want to alarm you or anything, but..." She cuts him off, deleting the remaining messages. He's worse than her gran. She wouldn't be surprised if this was some ploy to frighten her into ringing him up so he could come riding down in his metaphorical white charger. Fortunately, he doesn't know where she's staying. Something drags itself up the path and hurls itself at the front door. After the initial shock of the noise, she tells herself to think rationally. Even superstitions have their own infantile logic. The dead rat must be what they leave out for whatever this is. It's just a matter of getting past it and retrieving it. Lovely. She rushes out of the back doors as the front door warps under further blows, then circles around to where she threw it. The ew's bristles scratch her bare arm as she rummages around feverishly, hearing the dragging again. Nearer by now. It's almost dark, but she can just make out the grey fur in the gloaming. She reaches out and grasps it, feeling queasy at its soft, yielding limpness. But she'd rather touch that than the creature at her back whose rank breath she can smell. She throws the rat over her shoulder to draw it off. But it's like a cat that turns its nose up at what's offered and hunts wrens and sparrows instead. The pressure of its teeth on her neck and the rasp of the sacking covering the arms that enfold her in a bear hug vice tells her carrion will not suffice this time. Not when there's a boil to be had.